I had 60 seconds before the champagne cork popped and the sniper in the rafters let fly. My hand, still stinging from the industrial bleach I'd been using to scrub the VIP bathrooms, trembled as I tucked the cocktail napkin under his glass of hibiki. The paper was damp, the ink of my daughter's crayon barely legible. Your fiancé sold you out. There in position. Around me, the emerald peak purred. It was a symphony of the ultra-rich, the clinking of ice and crystal, the low thrum of a cello, and the rustle of tailored silk. Outside, the city lights of the skyline flickered like 1,000,000,000 diamonds, but inside, the air was heavy with the scent of $5,000 cognac and a betrayal that made my stomach churn. I approached table 1 like I was walking toward a firing squad. Kang Dae-jung sat there, the king on a velvet throne, impeccable, dangerous. His Tom Ford suit cost more than my daughter's future education. Beside him, Yoon Soo-jin leaned in, her hand resting on his arm with the warmth that was pure ice. She looks like a woman in love. She wasn't. 10 minutes ago, in the dim light of the storage corridor, I'd heard her whisper the order to end him. Dae-jung's thumb traced the edge of the damp cocktail napkin, his gaze remaining fixed on Nicole for a fraction of a second too long. In that look, Nicole saw the mask of the billionaire socialite slip, revealing the cold, predatory gears of a man who ruled by the sword. He didn't look at his fiancée. He didn't shout. He simply closed his hand over the note, crushing the crayon-smeared truth into his palm. Dae-jung, honey, is something wrong with the service? Soo-jin's voice was like honeyed poison, her hand reaching out to touch his sleeve with practiced affection. He didn't answer her. He moved with a violent, fluid grace that Nicole's brain couldn't quite process. One moment, he was the centerpiece of a high society dinner. The next, he was a force of nature. Down, he roared, the command cutting through the soft cello music like a blade. The first bullet didn't make a sound, just the rhythmic thwip of suppressed air, followed by the catastrophic explosion of the vintage wine bottle on the table. Red liquid, indistinguishable from blood in the dim light, sprayed across Soo-jin's white silk dress. Then came the glass, the massive panoramic windows of the Emerald Peak, designed to show off the city's glory, disintegrated inward in a rain of diamond-sharp shards as a heavy-caliber round whistled through the space where Dae-jung's head had been a second before. Nicole felt a heavy, solid weight slam her midsection. It wasn't the floor, it was Dae-jung. He hadn't dived for the exit or scrambled for cover alone. He had lunged across the table, his massive frame pinning Nicole to the plush carpet behind the reinforced brass railing of the service station. The scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and cold steel, filled her lungs, a sharp contrast to the stinging scent of industrial bleach on her own skin. "Stay small," he hissed against her ear. His body was a wall of muscle and Kevlar-lined wool, shielding her from the secondary hail of gunfire that began to chew through the leather booths above them. Nicole's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Terror, cold and absolute, threatened to swallow her whole. "My daughter!" she gasped, the words barely audible over the screens of the elite patrons and the rhythmic pop-pop-pop of Dae-jung's own security team returning fire from the shadows of the lounge. "I have to get to Maya." Dae-jung shifted, pulling a sleek, matte black handgun from a holster hidden beneath his tailored jacket. He looked down at her, the shattered glass in his dark hair glinting like a fractured crown. For the first time in her life, Nicole wasn't a ghost to the people she served. To the most dangerous man in the city, she was currently the only person who mattered. "You saved my life, Nicole," he said, his voice a low, vibrating growl as the restaurant turned into a kill zone. "Now I'm going to make sure you keep yours. Don't move until I say." The transition from the chaos of the Emerald Peak to the silence of the armored SUV was a blur of screeching tires and the heavy scent of spent gunpowder. Nicole sat huddled in the back seat, her arms wrapped tightly around Maya. Her daughter was mercifully silent, her wide eyes reflecting the flickering streetlights of Chicago as they tore through the city at speeds that defied every traffic law. Across from them sat Dae-jung. He was no longer the polished socialite. He was a warlord in the back of a steel carriage, his hands busy reloading a magazine with a mechanical, hypnotic rhythm. "Where are we going?" Nicole's voice cracked, the adrenaline finally ebbing and leaving a hollow, freezing chill in its wake. "Somewhere the rules of the city don't apply," Dae-jung replied without looking up. "You gave me the truth, Nicole. That truth made you a target. Soo-jin doesn't leave loose ends, and she knows your face." The SUV slowed as they approached a massive iron gate nestled behind a wall of dense foliage on the city's outskirts. Armed men in tactical gear stepped out of the shadows, their movements synchronized and lethal. After a brief biometric scan, the gates hummed open, revealing a fortress of glass, concrete, and reinforced steel. This was the Steel Cradle, Dae-jung's private estate, a place designed to survive a siege. As they stepped out of the vehicle, the sheer scale of the compound hit Nicole. This wasn't just a house, it was a sovereign nation. Security cameras tracked their every move, and the air felt heavy with the hum of high-frequency jamming equipment. A team of staff, dressed in the same muted tones as the architecture, stepped forward. They didn't look at her like she was a janitor. They looked at her with a terrifying professional deference. Dae-jung led them through a vaulted foyer where the walls were lined with ancient Korean artifacts and modern weaponry, a jarring blend of history and violence. He stopped before a heavy door and turned to Nicole. "This is your wing. It's self-contained. Food, clothes, medical supplies. My daughter's physician will be here in 10 minutes to check on Maya." Nicole looked down at her hands. She was still wearing her yellow rubber gloves, now torn and stained with soot. She looked at the opulent, sterile perfection of the hallway and then back at the man who had brought her here. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. Her apartment on 47th Street, the overdue electric bills, the quiet anonymity of the night shift, it was all gone. "I can't stay here," she whispered, though her heart knew the lie. "I have a shift tomorrow. I have a life." "You had a life," Dae-jung corrected, his voice softening just enough to be dangerous. "The moment you slipped me that note, you stepped across a line. There is no back, Nicole. There is only forward." He turned to leave, his silhouette sharp against the cold light of the fortress. Nicole watched him go, the weight of the steel walls closing in around her, realizing she had traded her invisibility for a cage made of gold and armor. The air in the council's inner sanctum was cold enough to preserve the dead, thick with the scent of aged cedar and the unspoken weight of century-old debts. Yoon Soo-jin stood in the center of the room, a masterpiece of calculated grief. She had refused to change out of the white silk dress ruined by the wine and glass of the Emerald Peak. To the 5 elders seated in the shadows, the crimson stains looked exactly like the blood of the man she was supposed to marry. "She was standing right there," Soo-jin whispered, her voice trembling with a fragility that would have been beautiful if it weren't so lethal. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her gaze downcast. The cleaner, the woman he's now shielding in his own home. The eldest member of the council, a man whose face was a map of scars and ancient coldness, leaned forward into the sliver of light. "You are suggesting, Soo-jin, that Kang Dae-jung has brought a viper into the Steel Cradle?" "I am suggesting she was the signal," Soo-jin snapped, her voice sharpening with a sudden, feigned panic. "Think about it. A nobody, a woman who blends into the walls. Who better for the Baekho clan to use as a Trojan horse? She warned him only when she knew the snipers were locked on, ensuring she would be taken into the one place the Baekho couldn't penetrate, his private quarters." The room remained silent, the tension of physical cord stretched to the snapping point. Soo-jin played her final card, a single crystalline tear tracking through the soot on her cheek. She didn't save him, she marked him. And now, while we sit here discussing protocol, she is likely mapping his security, feeding his weaknesses to the men who want us all dead. Dae-jung was blinded by his own misplaced gratitude. He thinks he found a hero, but he only found a more efficient assassin. She looked up then, her eyes meeting the elders with a terrifying conviction. She wasn't just defending herself, she was rewriting the narrative, turning Nicole's only active agency into a weapon of mass destruction. To these men, a black woman from the streets of Chicago was an impossible variable, a ghost that shouldn't exist in their world. Soo-jin knew that in a world built on paranoia, a lie that confirmed their prejudices was more powerful than a truth that challenged them. "If you don't act," Soo-jin said, her voice dropping to a haunting lullaby, "the Steel Cradle won't be his fortress. It will be his tomb. And that woman, that invisible cleaner, will be the one who turns the key." The silence of the Steel Cradle was unnatural. In her old life, the night was a symphony of distant sirens and the hum of a refrigerator that didn't quite work. Here, the air was filtered, temperature-controlled, and dead. Nicole sat by Maya's bed, her eyes tracing the heavy shadows of the room. She hadn't changed into the silk robes provided. She still wore the gray undershirt of her uniform, a relic of a woman who didn't belong in a fortress. The first sign of the breach wasn't a siren or a shout. It was the soft, rhythmic thud of the ventilation system cycling off, a sound only a woman who had spent years cleaning around industrial HVAC units would notice. Then, the red status light on the door's biometric scanner flickered from a steady glow to a dull, dead gray. The power hadn't just cut, it had been bypassed. "Maya, honey, wake up," Nicole whispered, her voice a ghost of a sound. She didn't wait for the child to wipe the sleep from her eyes. She pulled her daughter into the small, dark space between the heavy oak wardrobe and the reinforced concrete wall. "Stay here. Don't make a sound, no matter what." Nicole's mind raced back to Dae-jung's words: food, clothes, medical supplies. He had emphasized the last part with a knowing look. She scrambled to the vanity where the oversized first aid kit sat. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Tucked beneath the layers of gauze and antiseptic was something heavy, cold, and matte black. A subcompact pistol, its grip textured for a firm hold. The door didn't open. It hissed, the magnetic seals disengaging with a sound like a dying breath. A shadow detached itself from the hallway, a man in dark tactical gear, moving with a silence that suggested he wasn't there to negotiate. He didn't see the woman in the corner. He saw the empty bed. Nicole didn't think about the Mafia council or the politics of the Korean underworld. She thought about the way the man's shadow fell over Maya's favorite stuffed animal. Her hands, usually steady enough to scrub a floor to a mirror finish, didn't shake. She stepped out of the shadows, the weight of the weapon a natural extension of her arm. "Don't," she said, her voice a low, vibrating warning. The man spun, his suppressed rifle rising, but Nicole was faster. She didn't aim like a soldier. She aimed like a mother protecting her cub. The recoil was a sharp, biting shock to her wrist, the muffled crack of the shot echoing in the sterile room. The intruder slumped, the air leaving his lungs in a sharp whistle as he hit the floor. She didn't lower the gun. She stood over the fallen shadow, her breathing ragged, the invisible woman finally forced into the light. The steel cradle had failed to protect them. As the distant sound of boots thundered in the hallway, she realized the only security she had left was the cold metal in her palm and the blood on the floor. The smell of ozone and copper hung heavy in the sterile air as Kang Dae-jung burst through the doorway, his own weapon raised, his eyes wild with a rare, jagged edge of panic. He stopped dead. He didn't see a victim cowering in the corner. He saw a mother standing over a fallen wolf, the subcompact pistol held in a white-knuckled grip that refused to tremble. "Nicole," he breathed, the name sounding foreign in the wreckage of the room. He holstered his gun and stepped toward her, but she didn't lower hers immediately. The invisible woman was gone, replaced by something ancient and territorial. "Your fortress has holes," she said, her voice a low, dangerous rasp. Behind her, Maya was a silent shadow, clutching the hem of Nicole's shirt. "You promised her safety. You promised me this was the one place the world couldn't reach us." Dae-jung didn't offer a hollow apology. He looked at the dead man on the floor, one of his own, a traitor bought by Soo-jin's lies, and then back at the woman who had done what his entire security detail had failed to do. He reached out, gently placing his hand over hers, guiding the barrel of the gun toward the floor. His palm was warm, and for the first time, Nicole felt the slight tremor in his touch. "The council has turned," he admitted, his voice dropping so low it was almost a confession. He led her to the small sofa, away from the body, and sat beside her. The king of the Emerald Peak looked smaller in the dim light, the weight of his empire finally bowing his shoulders. "Soo-jin has convinced them you are a plant. They think I am weak for keeping you. They think my heart has made me a liability." He looked at Maya, then back at Nicole, his dark eyes reflecting a weary, kindred recognition. "I have spent my life building walls, thinking that if they were high enough, I would finally be safe. But tonight, I realized I'm just a man sitting in a very expensive cage, waiting for the people I trust to turn the key. I don't just owe you my life from the restaurant, Nicole. I owe you the reminder of what is actually worth fighting for." Nicole looked at her stained hands, then at the man who had the world at his feet and no one at his back. "I don't care about your council or your empire, Dae-jung. I care about her. That's the only position that matters to me." "I know," he said, and for a moment, the gap between the mafia boss and the cleaner vanished. In the silence of the breached sanctuary, a new lethal pact was forged, not born of debt, but of the shared, desperate hunger to protect the only pieces of light they had left in a world of shadows. Dae-jung paced the length of the command center, the blue light of a dozen high-definition monitors washing over his face like a digital shroud. The encryption was bypassed from the inside, he muttered, more to himself than to the woman standing in the shadows behind him. "My analysts are combing the logs, but the trail is whitewashed. Whoever did this erased themselves before they even began." Nicole stepped forward, her eyes not on the scrolling lines of code, but on the physical reality of the room displayed on the screens. "You're looking for a digital footprint," she said, her voice steady. "But people are messy. They leave a different kind of trail." Dae-jung paused, turning to look at her. "Explain." "I spent 10 years being the woman people ignored," Nicole said, walking toward the console. "When you're invisible, you notice things the important people don't. You notice when a chair is moved an inch to the left. You notice the smell of a specific brand of clove cigarettes in a stairwell that's supposed to be pressurized. You notice when a guard stops looking at his monitors to check the time every night at the exact same second." She pointed to a grainy image of a secondary stairwell near the kitchen. "See that? The janitor's closet on the 4th floor. It's been opened every night at 3:15 a.m. for the last week. The master cleaning schedule says it only needs restocking on Tuesdays. Why is someone going in there every night in the dead of the shift?" Dae-jung frowned, his fingers flying across the keyboard to zoom in. The timestamp confirmed her observation. He looked at her, a new kind of respect glinting in his dark eyes. "Show me." She led him out of the command center, walking the halls she had already begun to memorize, not through blueprints, but through the instinct of a woman who knew how buildings breathed. She didn't look at the security cameras. She looked at the carpet. In a quiet alcove near the north wing, she stopped and knelt. She reached under a heavy mahogany pedestal holding a Ming vase, a place no guest would ever touch and no guard would think to sweep. Her fingers came back with a small silver disc. It was a localized signal jammer, tucked away behind a layer of dust she knew hadn't been disturbed in months until now. "The cleaning crew for this wing didn't report this because they're the ones who planted it," she said, handing the device to him. "They aren't just cleaners, Dae-jung. They're Soo-jin's eyes. They know exactly when the shifts change because they're the ones who have to move around them." Dae-jung looked at the device, then at Nicole. The invisible woman had just mapped the heart of the conspiracy using nothing but the patterns of the dirt. "I spent a fortune on the best technology money could buy, but I forgot that the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone assumes has no reason to be there. Tell me everything else you've seen, Nicole. Let's finish cleaning this house." The rain turned the Chicago River into a churning soup of gray and neon, reflecting the city's cold indifference. Nicole stood at the edge of the abandoned pier, her old service jacket pulled tight against a wind that felt like a razor. In her hand, she gripped a burner phone like a lifeline. She didn't have to fake the tremor in her fingers. The cold was real, and the fear was sharper than any blade. She was a woman playing a part, but in this world, a missed cue meant a shallow grave. A sleek black town car pulled into the gravel lot, its headlights cutting through the mist like the eyes of a predator. The door opened and Yoon Soo-jin stepped out. She looked as though the world's violence hadn't touched her, her designer trench coat perfectly pressed, her hair a lacquered helmet of perfection. She walked toward Nicole with the slow, deliberate pace of a woman who believed she had already won the game. "I didn't think you had the stomach for this, Nicole," Yoon Soo-jin said, her voice barely carrying over the rhythmic slap of the water against the pilings. "I thought you were enjoying the life of a kept pet in the Steel Cradle." "The cradle is just a cage with better plumbing," Nicole spat, the bitterness in her voice authentic enough for Soo-jin to pause. "He's a dead man walking, and he's going to take me and Maya down with him. I'm a cleaner, Soo-jin. I know when a room is too dirty to stay in. I want out. I want the money you promised, and I want a ticket to a city where nobody knows his name." Yoon Soo-jin reached into her silk-lined pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, the weight of it representing more money than Nicole had earned in a decade of scrubbing floors. "And what do I get in exchange for your freedom?" Nicole reached into her own pocket and pulled out a thumb drive, the bait they had spent all night preparing. The biometric overrides for the West Wing, and the time of his private meditation in the garden tomorrow night. He'll be alone, no guards, just him and his ghosts. Soo-jin took the drive, her fingers brushing Nicole's with a cold, mocking touch. She looked at the drive as if it were a trophy. "You're smarter than you look, cleaner. It's a shame. You could have been a useful ghost." As the town cars sped away, the tires spitting gravel, Nicole didn't move. She waited until the taillights were swallowed by the fog. Only then did she tap the tiny transmitter hidden in the collar of her jacket. Her voice was suddenly steady, devoid of the desperate tremor she had used as a shield. "She took it, Dae-jung. The tracker is live. She's heading straight to the backhoe headquarters to deliver the keys to your kingdom." "Good work, Nicole." Dae-jung's voice crackled in her ear, dark and appreciative. "Come home. We have a gala to attend, and it's time we showed the council exactly who was running the house." The grand ballroom of the Blackstone Hotel was a sea of black ties and blood-red roses, a gilded stage where the city's most dangerous players hid behind masks of philanthropy. Nicole Harris stood at the top of the marble staircase, her breath catching in her throat. The gray service jacket and bleach-stained gloves were gone, replaced by a gown the color of midnight silk that clung to her like a second skin. Beside her, Dae-jung stood like a pillar of granite, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. For the first time, they weren't hiding in the steel cradle. They were stepping into the light to burn it all down. As they descended, the room went silent. The invisible cleaner was gone, replaced by a woman who commanded the air she breathed. Soo-jin, standing at the center of the Mafia Council's table, went pale, her champagne flute trembling. She had expected to be celebrating Dae-jung's funeral. Instead, she was watching his resurrection. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Soo-jin." Dae-jung's voice carried across the ballroom, a low, vibrating threat that cut through the quartet's music. Soo-jin recovered with the speed of a serpent. "Dae-jung, you're confused. You've brought the spy into our most sacred circle. Elders, this is the proof of his madness." "The only madness tonight," Nicole said, her voice amplified by the microphone she had hidden in the corsage of her dress, "is thinking a cleaner doesn't hear the walls talk." On the massive digital displays behind the stage, which were meant to show charity totals, a video flickered to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was the grainy, infrared footage from the supply corridor of the Emerald Peak. The audio was crystal clear. Soo-jin's voice, cold and devoid of love, confirming the coordinates for the sniper and the price for Dae-jung's head. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like a gale wind. Soo-jin scrambled toward the council, her poise disintegrating into a jagged, ugly desperation. It's a fabrication, a deep fake created by this nobody. But the nobody wasn't finished. Nicole pulled a second device from her clutch, the tracker data from the pier. This drive shows every location Soo-jin has visited in the last 48 hours, including the backhoe headquarters where she went to sell the keys to your kingdom. She didn't just sell out a fiancé, she sold out the council. The elder with the mapped scars stood up, his gaze turning on Soo-jin with the finality of a tombstone. The glamour was stripped away, leaving Soo-jin standing exposed in the center of the room she had tried to conquer. Dae-jung stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Nicole's. He didn't look like a man losing an empire. He looked like a man who had finally found his queen. "The house is clean," Dae-jung announced to the silent room, "and from now on, Nicole Harris is the one who holds the keys." The ballroom was still ringing with the echo of the recording when the elders gestured toward the center of the room. Two men in dark suits, their faces devoid of emotion, moved toward Soo-jin. She didn't scream. The shock of the exposure had robbed her of her voice, leaving her a hollow shell of the woman who walked in with a crown of lies. She was dragged out of the light, her heels clicking against the marble in a final, frantic rhythm, until the heavy doors of the Blackstone muffled the sound of her fall. The viper was removed, destined for a cold isolation in a place where silk and diamonds were merely memories of a life forfeited. Dae-jung didn't look back at the doors. He turned to the council, his hand still resting on Nicole's shoulder, a gesture of public and permanent claim. The scars on the elder's face seemed to twitch in the dim light of the gala. "The cleaner has proven more loyal than the fiancé," the elder remarked, his voice like dry leaves. "But loyalty is one thing, power is another." "She isn't just loyal," Dae-jung countered, his voice booming with a clarity that silenced the remaining murmurs in the room. "She is the only person who saw the rot when we were all blinded by the gold. She didn't just save my life, she saved this council from a war they didn't know was coming. She is the invisible hand that kept this empire from collapsing." He looked at Nicole, a silent question in his eyes. She didn't look down, she didn't hide. She stood with the quiet dignity of a woman who had already fought her own wars long before she ever set foot in the Emerald Peak. A week later, the Steel Cradle felt different. The air was no longer filtered with the heavy scent of paranoia. Nicole stood on the balcony of the north wing, watching Maya run across the manicured lawn below. Two guards followed at a respectful distance, not as jailers, but as a shield. Maya's laughter carried on the wind, a sound that finally belonged in a home, not just a safe house. A heavy door opened behind her. Dae-jung stepped out, carrying a small, leather-bound folder. He didn't offer it as a gift, but as a right. Inside were the deeds to a new life, a trust for Maya, the title to a private academy, and a partnership agreement that placed Nicole's name alongside his own on every ledger in the city. "The world will still look at you and see a cleaner," Dae-jung said, leaning against the railing beside her. "They will wait for you to stumble because they don't understand that the people who start at the bottom are the only ones who truly know how to stay at the top." Nicole took the folder, her fingers steady. She looked at the man who had seen her when she was a ghost and the daughter who would never have to be one. She wasn't just a survivor anymore, she was the architect. "Let them look," she said, a small, lethal smile playing on her lips. "By the time they realize I'm not a ghost, I'll already be the one holding the keys." She walked back into the study and took the seat at the heavy mahogany table, the seat that had once been reserved for a betrayer. The invisible woman was finally seen, and the new order of the Emerald Peak had begun.